SEGA Bits presents SEGA Talk, a podcast talking all things SEGA! With your hosts, George and Barry.
Look, it's a giant talking egg. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to the master here. Say what?
Hello and welcome to SEGA Talk number 33. I'm your host George, and with me is Barry.
Hello.
And if you guys like this show, make sure to check us out on patreon.com/SegaBits, where you can support us with actual dollar bills. But if you still want to support us and don't have them dollar bills, you can subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, or YouTube. That actually helps us a lot, and we appreciate it, especially if you guys share this show with some of your like-minded friends. But today we're talking about the 1996 Treasure-developed Guardian Heroes, which used to be a Sega Saturn exclusive until it was finally released on Xbox Arcade on October 12th, 2011. What is your history with Guardian Heroes, and when did you first play this game, and what do you think of it?
The first time I played this was actually the re-release, because it was a game that was incredibly rare, incredibly expensive. I know it's import friendly, but I did not have a Japanese Saturn until probably like when this was actually hitting Xbox 360, so no need to import. But yeah, so I started late, but I think the game was definitely lived up to the hype for sure. It's an awesome game, and I'm looking forward to talking about it with you.
Oh, yeah. My history, I didn't play it when it came out. I feel like the marketing for this game was really dropped because it wasn't like a front and center Sega Saturn game. Because like when the Sega Saturn came out, you had those like everybody knew a few of the games, even if you didn't even follow Sega, like Virtual Fighter, Virtual Cop. These 3D games all got like a bunch of advertisement. They even had TV commercials, but I don't remember anybody ever talking about Guardian Heroes when it came out. So I played it way later, maybe like in the early 2000s. I think it was when I started learning about how you could, I think it was one of my first burnt games, if I wanted to, like when I first was ability to do it. I think this is one of the first games. This one and like Three Dirty Dwarfs, which is another 2D beat 'em up game for the Sega Saturn, which is also amazing. And maybe we'll do an episode on that one. It's very, I guess, underrated. Mm-hmm. But my first thoughts of the game was how much of a like the genres of other games just collapsed together. And it's weird because like now everybody puts things into like RPGs. Like you'll see, oh, we made this game, but it has this twist to it, right? Like they'll take a classic gameplay like Castlevania and add RPG or more RPG systems or more deeper little things from other games. And this is what this game did, but way back in 1996 before anybody was doing this kind of thing. So it's interesting. It was definitely ahead of its time and underrated for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something you see in a lot of Treasure games. If you go back and play these and you've never played them at the time, you're going to be shocked at how innovative they are with their games, and just like the level of complexity going on with the, like I'm thinking of what's the other game, not Guardian Heroes but Gunstar Heroes, and just like there was that boss where you roll a dice, remember that? And then it was like next level stuff. I'm like, why? I was playing Sonic at this time and I thought it was amazing that a wrecking ball was going back and forth, and yet here's Treasure with these insane next level bosses that were all of this stuff's going on. It's crazy.
The best way to describe Guardian's Heroes is basically imagine Streets of Rage or Golden Axe type of beat 'em up game with a level up system. Back in the day, the team at Treasure at the time, lead designers Tetsuki Kikuchi and Masaki Akoyo called Guardian Heroes a fighting RPG. Kikuchi said this about creating the game. Why he created the game. First of all, I was starting to feel like the kind of games I like weren't being made anymore. You could say Guardian Hero was a result of my searching for what I personally found fun about games. It was made through a lot of trial and error, putting together elements that seemed fun to me. It wasn't like I had this amazing idea for a game right from the start. Gameplay-wise, the player had few options, including story mode, versus mode, where 6 players could compete as the main characters and unlock monsters, civilian, and bosses in timed battle in like a survival mode. But most people remember the game due to its single-player mode, which harkens back to being a fighting RPG. The game's story progressions changed based on actions, and the game had branching paths and allowed you to kill enemies and civilians alike. The game even had a similar karma system to Fable. What are your thoughts on the game implementing RPG systems into a beat-em-up genre? That's the question.
I mean, I think it's amazing, and I'm really glad they did it because the game stands out from other games at the time. It's not just a beat-em-up with, slick animation, but it's a beat-em-up with a lot more going on than meets the eye. Kind of reminds me, just talking about that, kind of reminds me of like Power Stone 2 and how it wasn't just a fighting game, but it kind of did have RPG elements where you're collecting items, you'd go into a shop, you'd mix things. So, I always enjoy games that do a little bit extra than just what's expected of the genre. And again, Treasure, it's what they're known for. I really like it.
And you could tell that the developer, when he was talking about it, the designer, he was talking about, I just put all the things that I found fun in games into one, and I guess he just really liked RPGs, I guess, right? Because, the story even has multiple choices and multiple paths. The paths kind of remind me of, like, Outrun, where you have to play it multiple times to get different results in the end. Mm-hmm. So all those little things really, came and made a really good beat 'em up game. Something that reminds like newer games still use, like what's that game called? The night game, the one that like you play as like a green knight, whatever knight, and then it's like Castle Crashers. And then there's like that's Scott Pilgrim. They use the level up system, and they obviously inspired by this game. Mm-hmm. So obviously stuff came out of this game, copycats, I guess you could say, or at least influence, not copycats, because technically they're different games. Like discussed above, the game also allowed you to earn experience points as you played the game, which was used to improve your character with 6 attributes. Strength, which was physical damage increase, vitality, which was HP, intelligence, which governed the size and spell strength, mentality, which determines your MP size and recovery, agility, which was your speed of attack and magic, luck, which it's the damage players give and receive, and I guess they had some special unlock for one character, but as you can see, this allows you to play the game differently. It allows you to experiment with experience points. And where did you end up spending the most of your experience points, and what lessons did you learn from leveling up your characters?
I think in a lot of RPGs, I always focus way too heavily on strength and hit points. And I think, we were talking about Phantasy Star Online. I played as a character that basically just relied on taking hits, but having enough hit points that it really didn't matter, and then just using items to fix myself without ever really relying on magic or anything like that. So it was all power and lots of hit points. And I think the lesson I learned is that doesn't always work. And especially when it comes to like bosses, where you need to have things like speed to overcome them or a stronger magic, because nothing sucks more than coming up to a boss and they're like, oh, you have to get them with like a fire spell, and you're like, I just use weapons.
And did you think that was an issue? Like, I remember when I was a kid and my brother was all into like Diablo, which is a game we talked about when we talked about Phantasy Star, another game. Again, and it was always like I always saw these like branching paths, right? Like, oh, you could put it on here and here, and it always kind of seemed intimidating to me. Like, whoa, if I screw up, I have to start all over. I didn't think of it like that in Guardian Heroes, because like beat 'em ups were always something we replayed growing up.
Right.
Like, it wasn't just something like, oh man, I invested 80 hours into this character and it's ruined. So when I played Guardian Heroes, that didn't seem to me like a burden because of that.
Right.
So to me, it was like, I'm going to start over anyway. Like, it's cool that I could slowly play and then play it a little bit differently. Like, when you get more dodging and you get more movement speed, you get to be more slicker. You get to go in and out.
Right.
Magic.
Yeah. Because
So
RPG elements can be pretty unforgiving within the confines of an RPG because, like you said, it's hours and hours of gameplay. So if you make the wrong decisions, they stick with you to the point where it's almost like I might as well restart the game. And is it worth it? You know, do I want to go through 40 hours again? But what works really well with a beat 'em up is that, like you said, it's very replayable. They go quickly. So like you screw up, so what? It's another, like 20 minutes of gameplay you have to go back over. No big deal. So
I think that worked for this game. It didn't give you that burden, right? Like, oh my God, no. So that's why I enjoyed this way more than I would enjoy a game like Diablo because of my weird obsession with screwing everything up. Oh no, it's over. Another thing that Guardian Heroes did was use 3 plane 2D level design. This meant that players could jump from a forward plane to a middle plane to a back plane, and each plane would have enemies. This plane jumping was kind of popularized by the SNK fighting game Fatal Fury. I don't know if you remember that game. What are your thoughts about multiplayer games like this, and do you generally enjoy this, I guess, aspect?
I think I enjoy them when they're done right. I don't like them when it becomes a chore to have to keep track of. Like, I prefer where you're just like walking forward and backwards on the screen, like in, you know, any standard beat 'em up. So it's hard to say. Like, it can be fun, but it can also be just a bit of a chore.
I was just thinking about that. Like, I was thinking, oh, do I like that implemented in any game? And I'm thinking like, no. And I'm like, what games have I played that had it implemented? And I'm like, Guardian Heroes and Fatal Fury Final Bout. And then I started thinking like, but I enjoy those games. And then I started thinking, yeah, but I enjoy it not because of that, just because they're great games that have that ability in them.
Right. Right.
So to me, it's like, would I like it if it was just like a Streets of Rage sort of like playing, and I would like probably would have liked it better. I mean, I don't think it ruins the game, but again, it's not something that stands out as a, oh my God, that's an amazing choice and it blew my mind. I'm buying that game because it has 3 planes, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's how I feel about it. It doesn't destroy the game. It's just more annoying sometimes, especially when you're playing with a bunch of people and there's a bunch of bad guys on screen. And you don't know which plane they're on, so you're jumping back and forth, and you have that animation. Yeah, that's just how I feel about it. Do you like it or dislike it or just whatever about it?
I'm whatever about it. Like, games I'm thinking of that do have it, it's either like not a big deal, like Sonic Mania had it, but it was very rare. In that one stage, remember, you were jumping to the background, the foreground. You know, nothing too crazy. Dick Tracy kind of had it. I don't know if you've played Dick Tracy on the Genesis, but you're walking along, you shoot people, punch people on the foreground, and then little guys appear in the background like a shooting gallery, and you switch to a Tommy gun and you're shooting around the background. I think that works because it's 2 gameplay styles, and you can kind of learn to switch between, you know, like running forward, shoot the guy in front of you, there's a guy behind you. It's fun. But it all depends on how much effort it is to switch between the planes. I've never played a Virtual Boy, but in looking at a lot of those games, they do that where it's like, oh, there's something happening behind you, jump back there, and it seems like such a chore. So at least here it's not as bad, but it's definitely not my favorite aspect of Guardian Heroes. And if it wasn't in it, I'd be fine with it. You know,
and the sequel, which we'll talk about later, does not have that. They took that out, which is kind of weird. But oh my God, I lost my place in the notes. Oh, well, we talked a lot about all these different systems that Treasure merged together to create this game. The actual game that inspired Treasure are probably games that might not pop into your mind right away. According to Mr. Kikuchi, the designer in the game. He said, when they asked him what influenced you, he said Capcom's Alien vs. Predator. Since that one came out, I've been too busy with development to play any games. This interview was back in 1996, I should add. Some of the other developers have been playing stuff like Virtual Fighter, though, so a number of things from that made their way into Guardian Heroes. And they asked him what he liked about Alien vs. Predator. He said, there was just something about it that when I saw it for the first time, I was like, yeah, this is what I've been looking for. It's one of those games that just makes you feel like you're a badass. I was really impressed by the impossible acrobatic moves the Predators could do. I think you'll clearly see that influence in future games I direct or design. Have you ever played Capcom's Alien vs. Predator beat 'em up game? And are you surprised that that's the game named as an influence, but not games like iconic games like Double Dragon, Final Fight, or Golden Axe?
I have not played Alien vs. Predator, but I have seen gameplay footage of it. I know it's a rare game, and I know that actually right before we recorded, I was reading the front page of our website, segabits.com, and I had that Arcade 1-Up Sega cabinet story, and in the comments, someone was mentioning they actually were talking about the Alien vs. Predator game and how they don't like how it's locked behind that big Capcom logo, remember, with like the sticks that it's like a plug and play.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
So that's on it. So actually that got me thinking about it. So the fact you bring it up, it's actually fresh in my mind. But in looking at it, I'm not surprised. I think if you were just reading this on like a Wikipedia entry or something, you'd be like, "Wow, that's really weird." But you got to imagine at the time, the games that have since become classics, there were other games out there that either have become forgotten because they're hard to find now, or because they're just, they never really caught on and became that popular. So I totally could see that game influencing him. It's not a shock to me really at all, because it seems much more in line with this game than the other ones you mentioned are.
Oh, yeah. And I could tell that Alien vs. Predator, I could see why they would like it. If you played past Treasure titles, they have weird aliens, weird creatures, and even the 2D pixel design kind of reminds me a lot of a Treasure game. It's Capcom, but it's a great game. I've played it on a MAME cabinet emulation, and it's cool. I'm not surprised it's a cult classic, and I'm not surprised he's influenced by it. You just assume that he would do something like Golden Axe because of the, I guess, swords and sorcery,
right?
Thing, and that was a huge game. And there was also other Capcom games that did medieval fantasy, like the Dungeons and Dragons beat 'em up games at the time. So he probably was influenced by a lot of games at the time. It just seems that during this interview, which was in 1996, this one was the fresh game in his mind.
Right.
We discussed a lot about the gameplay, but one thing an RPG needs is a story, and Guardian Heroes had one. They had one, that's for sure. So let me read you the manual, the U.S. manual story, and then we could talk about what you think about the storyline and how much it affected your childhood and made you become a hero that you are today.
Sure.
The Guardian Heroes are a group of adventurers who love nothing more than excitement and adventure. They've banded together in search for a legendary sword, the one which supposedly saved the world in ancient times. One day, Han, one of our Guardian Heroes, is walking in the forest when he comes across a sword stuck out. Taking it back to the Guardian Heroes headquarters, Han shows it to his friends. Could this be the legendary sword? Suddenly, a stranger bursts into the heroes' HQ as she is warning the Guardian Heroes to beat a hasty, I don't know what that means. The royal knights arrive under orders of the king's advisor, Cannon, to find the ancient sword. Cannon must have the sword at any cost, and the heroes want to know why. The answers to that question will take them on a quest across the land through battle after thrilling battle. Every decision counts as this sword and sorcery fantasy. In this sword and sorcery fantasy, making the right ones and bring the Guardian Heroes to victory. Make the wrong ones and the sword will fall into the hands of darkness. what are your thoughts on the Guardian Heroes storyline and your thoughts on the game having multiple paths for your story and letting you choose?
I love it. I think it's very cool, and it's actually interesting. We were, like I mentioned, Power Stone. This kind of has a Power Stone vibe because it's a eclectic group of heroes. They all have one goal, and the end result is different for each one because they each want to use the, in this case, the sword for, likely different reasons, It also kind of evokes, what's that game? The one, not Space Ace, the other one. You know what I'm talking about.
I don't think I know what you're talking about. You have to look it up.
Dragon's
I was gonna
Lair.
say, oh yeah.
Where it's more like a goofy animated kind of take on a medieval setting, and I think too the reason why they went with this setting as opposed to something else was because the RPG elements just really fit it well.
Yeah.
You have to go through a lot of planning and design direction in order to make it work for anything else, as seen with, like Earthbound and Phantasy Star Online. So I'm sure they were kind of in a crunch here a little bit. It's not like they had the luxury to make this game. So I could see... Yeah.
I was gonna say there's a little quote from him. Maybe I'll pull it up, but he was basically just saying if he was happy with his game, and of course, no developer I've ever heard in Japan is happy with the product. Like we talked about in the first episode of Sega Talk, like even Outrun, even though I feel like that's one of the most perfect racing games or whatever, they wanted to do a lot more to it. And so the fact that we got what it is, I think sometimes, cutting the game short helps the game, I think. Because like one of the iconic things about Outrun is you have one car, it's a Ferrari. They wanted to do, choices in that game. But as for the story, it reminds me a lot of like Golden Axe, but like a reverse. Instead, like in Golden Axe, they have to stop, what's his name, Death Adder, and get the Golden Axe. This one, the heroes already have the weapon. They're just figuring out the truth behind the weapon, which is a sword. So there's something, in beat 'em ups where it's like ancient relic. You have to figure it out. So yeah, it works out. It's not super amazing, and I don't think they were going for a super amazing story. But I like what it is for what it is because I just played the game and beat things up. That's why I played the game. And what do you think about the animated cutscenes or whatever they had in the game?
Cool. I mean, they blew me away, and I was watching them back in the Xbox 360 era,
Yeah. It's cool because like I always wanted something like that for like Guardian Heroes. Like a lot of treasure games just feel like they're really anime. Like these are just, they feel like they could be an anime TV show sometimes, like with the designs and everything.
Absolutely.
The game had a pretty well-known soundtrack that was composed by Hideki Masataki, who was a member of the iconic Yellow Magic Orchestra, and Nazo Suzuki. Have you ever heard of the Yellow Magic Orchestra?
I haven't. It sounds like a Beatles thing, like the Yellow Submarine.
Yeah, you're right. Actually, it is. And they were in the 70s. They've had Billboard hits. They've done music with a bunch of pop stars. They're actually really famous. I actually looked up their Wikipedia. I didn't know who they were before the notes, and I heard some of their tracks, and they make good music. So check them out. The music came out and it had electronic with some jazzy undertones. In your opinion, what is your favorite track, and what is your opinion overall of the whole soundtrack?
I have not heard the soundtrack in a bit, but I think the most memorable one is, as it always is with games, the first stage, because that's what you experience the most. I believe it's titled, Awakening?
Yeah, I think so.
So, yeah. So I enjoy that one, but, sitting down with the soundtrack, there are some really great ones. But I honestly, I can't pinpoint any of them. How about you?
I only know one track from the back of my head. See, this is the thing. Like, I don't listen to soundtracks. I know a lot of people that play video games are like naming you tracks, and they get really angry at me sometimes when they're like, "But what about the music? Why didn't you talk about music in this review?" But I know Schiffler in the Dark. I had to look it up before we did this, but that's a cool track, and it's always burned in the back of my head. Like I'm just humming it and stuff. And Jazzy Sabotage is like the title of the track, but you get the soundtrack online. It has like 27 tracks. I actually hope that they do a data disc for this. I know they just did Radiant Silvergun, which has nothing to do with Sega, but I hope they release this one because we've only had a CD release of it, and that was way back in the day. I think maybe in the early 2000s. So this is kind of a rare thing to pick up it physically. And I would like to have a copy of it. It's pretty. I actually like the soundtrack, and I like collecting soundtracks. So it's one of those things that I'm looking forward to. Will you buy a data disc of this?
I probably wouldn't, just because there's a backlog of ones that I still want to get. I really want to get Outrun, but they have not re-released it.
Oh, they haven't?
I don't believe so. No.
That's a slick release.
I feel like you'd get this.
Oh yeah, of course I would get it. I mean, yeah. I'm a Treasure fan. Like, I feel like growing up, if you're a Sega fan and you liked Sega consoles, you had to like Treasure games. At least I did. Like, I always thought they were like Sega games. Like, I always thought of them as the same family, even though they were independent.
Treasure was kind of like the Platinum games of the 90s for Sega.
Oh, hell yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Like, there are people who are like super hardcore into them. They'll buy every game coming out, even the ones that are so-so. They're still like, but it had great ideas. And then there will be the people who go, yeah, but they're not true Sega games.
True. So. But I guess they're kind of like what Konami was for early Nintendo, or Capcom, I guess, when Capcom was making all those Super Nintendo exclusives, and everybody, all the Sega fans were like, I wish I had that game. Well, the Sega fans had Treasure, and they're like, you wish you had this game, right? Like, Gunstar Heroes, Alien Soldier, Anyway, so let's talk about, this is something I want to add in new episodes, and I want to expand on this aspect, but I want to look at old reviews. I couldn't find too many old reviews online, and I had no time to like pick out my back catalogs and look for hopefully something. So while we discussed Guardian's Heroes being a cult classic, it wasn't that well received back in the day. So this is what they say on the internet, by the way, but I actually looked it up, and it actually got like an 88 Metacritic. But then again, we're not looking at every review. So I'm going to call BS on that. I think it was well enough, because I couldn't find a bad review online, really, that outside of making points that we already know. So the most negative review I found was GamePro's Scary Larry, who had a who talked about the game's long-winded dialogue and bad graphics. He said, "Those poor, simpler graphics have no place on a next-gen machine. Colorful doesn't always mean clean, and there are plenty of jagged edges and pixelated fires and breakup." I don't know what that means. I guess when they break, I don't know what that means. Sorry. Regardless of this, he still gave the game a strong recommendation. What are your opinions on the game's graphics, and did it affect your enjoyment of the game?
I thought the graphics were like the main reason to play the game before you really get into the gameplay style. Like, just seeing videos of this, you want to get your hands on it and play it. It looks awesome. Okay. So,
because like, I don't know, a lot of people that I knew at the time were kind of down on not being a 3D game, and I guess that's something that we had to deal with as in the mid 90s, where everybody wanted everything to be 3D, and then now we go back. Now kids these days are like going back and playing 2D games and going, oh, I don't want to play early 3D.
And that's the thing, like, looking back, the Saturn got so much shit back in the day because people were like, oh, another 2D game, come on, it's the 90s, we want 3D games. And it's like, dude, you're talking about Guardian Heroes in a stall and Rayman, like some of the most iconic, classic, beautifully animated sprite games. But because it does not have your next-gen 3D graphics, which look like shit on PlayStation 1 and Saturn, you're upset. Like, these people, a lot of these people were clearly living in the moment, and I don't blame them. But, some of these quotes will really age terribly, because you look ahead and people are like, oh, I really liked that game where it was a blocky mess and I couldn't see 5 feet in front of me, and no one plays this game anymore, whereas everyone's talking about these, 2D classics and really wishing that we saw like a Sonic Mania style game on the Saturn. It's just, it was a weird time.
That's what I'm saying. Like, now it's funny because like now when you look at games that sold a ton, it's like you got games like Shovel Knight trying to be an NES game. You got like Undertale trying to look like a Super Nintendo game. But if those games came out on the like Nintendo 64 or on the Saturn or whatever at the time, people would be like, no, this is bad graphics. This should not be on next gen consoles. But now we have these machines that have the power to run beautiful Uncharted 4 like looking games, but people are like playing old Super NES looking games. Like, oh, this is fun.
Yeah, and I will admit that in the modern day, I'm kind of over games that look like NES or even SNES style. Like, I think that if you are going to do 2D pixel games now, like, try to push for like peak Saturn era. You know what I mean? Like, try to emulate stuff like Guardian Heroes or like I mentioned, Rayman or Astal, rather than trying to look like, it was 1986. I get the appeal and the aesthetic, but for me, like, I'm kind of over it. The gimmick's kind of worn off for me. I don't know.
And it's trying to make the game look like the characters were animated on screen, like anime figures. And I think the best there are 2 other games we just talked about before that was influenced by Guardian Heroes or had an RPG element, but Scott Pilgrim and Castle Crashers both also use like these like unique art styles. One of them was like a Flash art style, Castle Crashers, and the other one was a manga / comic book art style with Scott Pilgrim. And I think that if we ever got a brand new like real like Guardian Heroes remake from the ground up with new sprites, they would just look like smooth animated, like, I guess, Skullgirls or Scott Pilgrim, right? Like, high detail. Right. They wouldn't have the pixelated look that they had. That would look slick. I would actually like that as a re-release. But the game isn't as popular as me and you would like it to be. So it's probably not going to happen with Sega's, I guess, money or how they spend their money. But let's talk about designer Mr. Kikuchi, which he was interviewed again in 1996 when he talked about what he thought about the mixed reactions about the game. And that's why I wrote that it had mixed reactions, because they asked him in the interview in 1996 about it. So he said, I think this schism, sorry, it's emerged between players and developers. In the early days, there was a sense that players and developers were searching for a new style and genres together. There was a kind of reciprocity between them. For example, if a game only allowed you to jump and punch, then players would explore all the different ways that mechanic could be realized in the gameplay. And for developers, it was another company. If another company released a game in a certain genre, that developer would certainly try to do something different. But recently, there's been an increase in a number of players that show no interest in finding their own way to play. Everything is becoming very passive, with players not wanting to do any work, but just sort of play the game as if they were watching a movie. And developers, too, have learned a system that consistently sells games. If something new comes out, they all just imitate that. Now you can call that cowardly, yes, but from our perspective at Treasure, we see this as a big chance for us. A more and more knockoff games proliferate. We think that by doing something decidedly new, players will take notice, and it's good. It's a good time for us. This was back in 1996, right? So, do you find what he says is correct, that most people are more passive and aren't being more unique when they play games? And is he right? This is like 24 years ago. So is he right? Or do you think, even though we had more genres, like I think in the last 10 years we've kind of increased the genres that we have, and more things are more popular. But do you think that developers are still doing the copycat, the let's play it safe, I guess like Sonic Mania working on something that's worked in the past? I mean, even indies are doing that.
I think at the time and even now, it is definitely, by and large, people are playing it safe, and we're seeing that. I mean, more and more with people are like, oh, did you see the new Battlefront or Company of Heroes? You know, like they're all kind of the same game with just minor enhancements, and gaming journalism doesn't really get excited until someone's like, hey, this game is a standard Mario game, but you throw a hat at something and you become different. They're like, oh my God, they're mixing it up. They're trying something new. And it's like, yeah, they are, but I feel like game developers should be doing this a lot more often. And that it's
hard because like we all like our McDonald's, right? Like we have like Sonic Mania. People would say this would fall under that, right? But we like it. I guess
so, yeah.
We like it. Let's say Mario. How many Mario games have released? People like it. How about Marvel movies? We're living in an age where the more we know our audience, the more the people that are different despise the mainstream, I guess, because we already found the path for the money. I do like that Treasure was one of those companies was like, I don't care. I'll do a beat 'em up game, and then we'll do a shoot 'em up game, or a rail shooter. We'll do whatever we want. And they never, I guess, stayed what was popular. Like during the mid 90s, they probably should have done a 3D fighting game if they wanted to be popular, right? But they didn't. They were like, we're gonna do a beat 'em up game because we like beat 'em up games, and we used to play them in arcades. So I love them about that. I love that about them, but I feel like that's the reason they're not popular, and that's the reason why they only have like 10 employees according to Wikipedia. So I think it's the reason we don't see big budget games from them anymore, which is sad because I mean I feel like they're one of the best developers from Japan that aren't making games right now that maybe need a contract, or at least make some remakes of their past games, or at least release this game on other consoles. But before we talk about other consoles, let's talk about it actually getting a, I guess, port late back in 2011 on Xbox Live. So we finally got it in October 12th, 2011. And the port actually changed a lot of things from the original, including a widescreen 16:9 aspect ratio that expanded the field of play, which will let you see more bad guys, which is actually one of the biggest reasons to play this version of it. The game featured original and remix graphics mode and had a lot of filters to make the sprites look nicer. And I hate those filters, but remix mode included new attacking, dodging, and air dashing and air recoveries, which was inspired by Treasure's Bleach, the Blade of Fate fighting game they made. Treasure even went in and made changes to the dialogue and updated some of the game's story, including changing names of Earth and Sky Spirits to Earthblood and Skyborn. Now, I don't know why that's a big deal, but they changed the names, which is a weird change. The Xbox Live Arcade port also featured online play for multiplayer modes and expanded on the competitive mode, which now allowed 12 concurrent players instead of 6 on the Sega Saturn. They also added arcade mode and Endless Gauntlet as new modes. As of November 6, 2016, the game is now playable on Xbox One. It seems that Guardian HD is the definitive version of the game and is available on Xbox, I guess. I mean, I put modern systems, but really just Xbox. Do you think the game needs a port to Switch and PS4? And what do you think about the changes in the game? And I guess it's really an expansion of the game. They should have just called it Guardian Heroes HD Plus.
Or Remix or something.
Remix, yeah.
I do think the game needs ports, but as we see from Sega ever since the Xbox 360 era, they kind of pick and choose these remakes to go on certain consoles. Like we have 3D Classics and Sega Ages, but then Xbox 360 has all these Xbox Live Arcade exclusives. Like I know M2 did a few collections, and then there was this one from Treasure, Afterburner Climax. Was that on PS3?
Yeah, Afterburner Climax was on PS3.
Yeah, and then they would do ones like that where it was like Daytona or Afterburner Climax, and it would go to multiple systems. So it's like if you are a Sega remake or re-release fan, you need to own every console in order to enjoy everything. So I think at this point they should spread it out a little more. I would love to see it on Switch and PS4. I don't think it's going to happen, unfortunately. But never say never.
One thing I did notice from Treasure on Twitter, they've been talking more about porting games over, and I think we got Ikagura, which they own.
That's
I want
right.
to say, and we've gotten it on Switch, PC, and I think it's on PS4. It feels like for a while they had some contract with Microsoft back in the 360 days when Microsoft was trying to like get their foothold in Japan. I remember there was even rumors that they were going to make a new shooting game exclusively for Xbox, and that's why they were re-releasing the Treasure games exclusive on Xbox Live Arcade. And that never happened. It was canceled, and nobody ever talked about it. It was just like a little mention. So that kind of sucks. But I think that's the reason Guardian Heroes stayed exclusive, because I think Microsoft might have paid for it, and it wasn't a Sega thing. And it's the same thing with Rez. But we'll see. Now we got it everywhere, so maybe we'll see a limited run games of this version too. That'd be pretty slick.
It would be cool to see a Treasure compilation and call it Treasure Chest. And
I think they did something like that in Japan for the Sega Ages version, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be cool for America. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
Well, fans have been clamoring, both Sega and Treasure, for a sequel to Guardian Heroes. For years, we got just that on an unlikely platform. In 2004, they released Advanced Guardian Heroes on the Game Boy Advance under publisher Ubisoft, which had nothing to do with Sega. This sequel took away the 3-plane system and added a new air dash and homing jumps, which I'm assuming is the ones that were added into the re-release. I don't really want to go into all the details about the game because we could technically do a new episode. But it wasn't well received compared to the original, with Metacritic giving it a 65 out of 100, according to IGN. Just because it's a Treasure game doesn't automatically make it a fantastic gaming experience, and Advanced Guardian Heroes proves that the development team isn't this group of infallible game designers. The core game design element is currently sound, and when the action retains its full pace, it's actually a lot of fun. But the processor slowdown is downright unbearable in places, and it's far too frequent to be acceptable. It's rare when a game keeps up to its intended speed, which makes it next to impossible to do specific moves that are important to succeed to the game's levels. The game's story presentation also adds to a sloppy feel of the production, and seems like it was rushed straight through the translation cycle without any brush up to make the tale coherent. After experiencing the stunning product that is the studio's Astro Boy Omega Force, it's more than a little disappointing to take a significant step backwards with Advanced Guardian Heroes. So,
that's a shame.
Have you ever played this game, and what are your thoughts about the sequel coming out on a Game Boy Advance?
I have not played this. I do have Gunstar Superheroes, and I love it.
Yeah,
and now that you're mentioning Astro Boy Omega Force, I want to run downstairs and see if I own that, because I feel like I bought it.
It's a good game.
I don't recall if I did. It is a cool game, though. But yeah, I was aware of this. I haven't played it, but I mean, it is what they were doing at the time. They were doing Game Boy Advance games. I think at the time it's disappointing, but looking back, Game Boy Advance really was the home to a lot of fantastic sequels and kind of, not remakes, but there were a lot of like Dreamcast games on the Game Boy Advance, actually, like mobile versions of them. And I love the console. Like, I think Game Boy Advance is my favorite Nintendo platform, really. I think it's an awesome system. The little The one that opens with the light up screen. It's awesome.
I got one that's like just the old version, but just modified back screen. But I love the Game Boy Advance too. I think it's like as close as I get to the Nomad. I mean, it's a little more powerful, but it's a nice little console, and it got a lot of. I think people forget how popular that thing was. Like, it was getting a ton of games that shouldn't even be in there. Like, we're like, dude, Nukem 3D. All right, I'll play it.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say the Game Boy Advance is like a mobile version of the Saturn, so it does kind of seem like a weird decision in that case. But when you look at like the release order of Nintendo hardware, the Game Boy Advance is kind of like their Saturn in the sense that it was a 2D powerhouse rolling off of the SNES, whereas the Saturn was a 2D powerhouse rolling off of the Genesis. Difference being that, you know, the Game Boy Advance is portable. It has the Game Boy name on it, so people don't really make that connection. But when I play it, it very clearly feels like a SNES 2 to me.
Yeah. And it's crazy how much Sega Genesis or Sega sequels it technically got. Like, they had a Jet Set Radio game on it. Why? Why not? Space Channel 5. It had Choo Choo Rocket. It had Gunstar Heroes, Super Gunstar Heroes. It had Advanced Guardian Heroes. It's crazy.
I think I own like 15 Game Boy Advance games, and every single one are Sega games. I don't own it. I think I maybe own Advance Wars, but that's about it. You know, like, if you're a Sega fan and you have not checked out the Game Boy Advance, it's well worth owning, despite Advanced Guardian Heroes probably not living up to sequel material.
And there was a collection of classic Sega arcade games, and one of them was it had like a port of Outrun. I played that a lot because it was like back in the day playing Outrun portably in an arcade version. I mean, it wasn't close to it, but it was pretty cool. They had fighting games, they had everything. It was insane back then. I remember those like Tekken or whatever ports that looked like semi 2D. You know what I mean? You know that 3D look that those games had. Where like the pixels were very terrible when they try to make them 3D because it's basically a Super Nintendo. But yeah, I don't know. I'm very like mixed about the idea of making sequels to like a Saturn game on like a Game Boy. Like, I feel like it should have been on. They should have just waited and put it on an Xbox 360 and made it like an Xbox Live Arcade game. And it's sad that there won't be a budget for the animation, but I think it would have been very slick.
It would have been cool as a bonus to the Xbox 360 release. I just recently picked up the Aladdin Lion King multi-pack for the PS4, and as bonuses it has the Game Boy games, and they're really weird and kind of unplayable, but it's just kind of a cool way to see what they were doing at the time for the handheld consoles. So if they could just have done a straight up like emulation of the sequel as a bonus, it would have been cool, because otherwise it's only going to be on the Game Boy Advance from here on out, and people are just going to be forgetting about it, like we probably almost did if we didn't, mention it at the end of this.
Yeah, and I just wanted to bring up that Castle Crashers, which we talked about, is a beat 'em up game with RPG elements. According to this article from this September or 2019, September 2019, that game just re-released a remaster on Switch, PS4, and Xbox One again. But before that, it sold over 20 million copies. So that says there is sort of a market for a couch co-op beat 'em up game with RPG elements. So I mean, maybe one day somebody will come back and port it, re-release the port maybe on Switch and see how it does. But I think there is a lot of people that they like these kind of like couch co-op games. Like, there's not a lot of them out there, and this is the first one. It would be sick to have a new re-release on PS4 and Switch just to see how it does, because I think maybe Sega will be a little more surprised.
For sure.
Anything else you want to add to the game before we close this episode of Sega Talk?
I see here in the notes, is there still a market for beat 'em up RPGs? and it got me thinking. Streets of Rage 4. Like, I hope there's more to that game.
You think they'll
No.
add like RPG elements to it?
I don't know. I don't think they will. But I'm just thinking about this. It's like it's gonna be 2020. It is 2020. And I feel like Streets of Rage just needs a little bit extra than just animation and extra characters. I don't know. It would be fun.
It does look like the animation, the art style. It reminds me of Wonder Boy, which is amazing. I like that game, the way it looks. I think what they look like they're doing right now is focusing on at least the juggling system and that fighting system they got going on, which I actually think looks pretty slick. But I agree. There's something about the game that I think they're hiding from us. Like, I think there's more beneath they're showing. They've only shown us, like, let's say when you put all the footage together, 5 minutes of footage, if that. Right. So we'll see. Can you imagine them doing a Guardian Heroes HD remake or a brand new one?
That'd be awesome.
That would be pretty cool. Thanks, you guys, for listening to today's Sega Talk. We'll catch you guys in the week after next week when we cover a different game. If you guys want to tell us what game to cover, you could go on our Patreon and tell us, or you could hound us on Twitter and maybe we'll listen and have no other idea what to do and just play the episode you want. Maybe.
Yeah.
You never know.
Maybe.
What game you want to do, Barry?
Sonic.
We'll do Sonic 06 again, part 2. That'll be sick.
I can't wait.
Bye, guys.
Bye, kids. Cool.